As you know, recently one of our council persons was stopped, and our commitment was that we would conduct a timely and transparent investigation specific to the actions of our police sergeant. And so we'll go into some key findings. You should know going forward that that investigation from the disciplinary part of it is still pending. This is just our findings. We have been working with the Office of the Inspector General, our internal affairs has, and that investigation, I'm told, is still continuing. As I indicated on the night of the stop of the council person, the officers did follow proper procedures by detaining Councilman Cushingberry and his companion, Mr. Clements. The officers further requested a supervisor, which was appropriate as it relates to our procedures. However, once the sergeant was requested, we determined that the sergeant failed to conduct a thorough assessment of the incident and gather all the facts surrounding, and he also failed to make upward notifications. So a synopsis of what I would describe will be the actions based on the statements made by not just the 2 officers that initiated the stop, but it was a total of 6 officers that actually responded to the location prior to the arrival of the supervisor. What we know is the councilman, Mr. Cushingberry, pulled into oncoming traffic and failed to signal, and doing so cut off the path of the marked police unit as he was leaving the penthouse lounge. Mr. Cushingberry initially pulled over once the police lights were activated. However, as the officers exited their police vehicle and began to approach, Mr. Cushingberry began to drive a short distance. And at that point, he stopped. And this information was confirmed by the officers because at the time of his continued movement, that was broadcasted over the police radio. As the officers requested Councilman Cushingberry's driver's license, he attempted to turn on the vehicle, at which time one of the officers reached in and recovered the keys so that there would be no additional movement of the vehicle. This was confirmed by news reports that were given over local Channel 4, as well as an interview with one of our supervisors during our internal affairs investigation. Officer who reached in to recover the keys, as he did so, noticed that there was a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the interior of the vehicle. He also noticed both partners, the 2 initially responding officers, not only noticed that there was an empty alcohol bottle, but there was a half-filled cup of alcohol inside of the vehicle. In addition to that, the initial responding officers discovered during the course of this investigation what appeared to be in the center console, a smoked marijuana cigarette in the center console of the vehicle. But as the investigation progressed, recognizing that the passenger, as it was pointed out in early investigation, that he had 4 marijuana cigarettes on his person. So based on the totality of these circumstances, the officers certainly had reasonable suspicion to stop the councilman and to believe that he was possibly under the influence of an intoxicant. And of course, the councilman admitted to having 1 alcoholic drink at dinner during this evening. Some other key facts as it relates to this. As I pointed out, there were 6 officers that responded. The sergeant didn't arrive till some time later, and upon the supervisor's arrival, he directed 4 of the officers to leave the location. And so the sergeant failed to really explore what the observations were by all the officers that arrived at the scene. What we do know, based on the officer's statements, the councilman was uncooperative during that encounter, that he did mention his status as a council person by showing his ID. No driver's license was shown, no proof of insurance. And factually, his vehicle registration was expired by 1 day. Okay. So again, when you look at the totality, when you look at the fact that there was certainly evidence that possibly the councilman was under the influence, there was no efforts to administer a field sobriety test, which ultimately the decision by the sergeant was that the officers would write a citation for the traffic infraction, and he was released from the scene. Clearly, in our minds, in reviewing this case, we will never know if the councilman was under the influence, but it certainly does put the public at risk when someone is stopped and there's evidence to suggest that. And so that's the focus of the charges as it relates to the sergeant. So at this point, I open this matter up for any questions that you might have.
So what will happen to this officer?
He'll be facing discipline. Again, that investigation, that part of the investigation is still continuing. And the discipline that will be based on a disciplinary matrix that we have.
Any idea why the counseling, I guess, some sort of, it appears to be special treatment. Would you call it special treatment, and what reason do you think is behind that?
Well, it does tend to show that, and that's our concern. Certainly when you look at the totality, when you look at the public safety issues, when you look at the violations, it tends to suggest that the councilman was given preferential treatment. It was a supervisor's decision, and certainly what's being said here today that there are no special treatments to anyone because of status. The decision should have been that a thorough investigation should have been conducted, and certainly if there was no evidence that the councilman was under influence, then at minimum, certainly there was evidence that should have been recovered and placed in property, and that was not done.
Is there any indication that the sergeant has some sort of relationship with Mr. Cushingberry, whether it's a family relationship, a relative type situation, or any kind of friendship?
No indication whatsoever. My belief, based on looking at this matter, is it tends to just support that historically, when certain people have had encounters with the police department, they were treated specially, not just here in Detroit. We know of cases outside the city of Detroit. But given the magnitude, when you talk about the smell of marijuana emanating from the vehicle, a half-filled cup of alcohol, unregistered vehicle, no evidence of a driver's license on your person. The question that your viewers and listeners would have is, if I were stopped, would I be treated the same way? And certainly there's a great likelihood, certainly with the enforcement posture of this department as it relates today, that some action would have been taken. Because there is a public safety issue as we see it. And again, this is not to go back and say that we're going to go out and initiate any additional charges against the council, because that is absolutely not the case. There's no evidence at this point. That's lost.
But one question would be, the Inspector General has his own investigation going on. Will your findings be passed along to the Inspector General?
Yes. In fact, we've already met with his office, and we have shared information. He is aware of our findings. And so, as we fully complete our investigation, we will make sure that he has access to all of that information.
This not showing the driver's license, was he asked to produce a driver's license and just didn't have it on him, or did he just choose to flash his council ID, and whose decision was it for that to be okay?
It wasn't okay. It was his decision based on the officer's account that evening that he initiated by indicating that I'm a council. He was showing his ID, and just at the point of contact, very little cooperation with the police officers. And this was statements made on the 6th that were at the scene, not just the two initiating officers. In fact, the additional officers only responded because of the refusal to initially stop. They got over the police radio and indicated that they were attempting to stop a vehicle, and so other officers responded.
But among the 6, they were asking for his driver's license?
Well, I'm not sure which of the 6 or how, but typically in a traffic stop situation, that's the first thing that police officers ask for is a driver's license and proof of insurance.
One of the things, Chief, a lot of people are asking is why aren't you seeking charges for fleeing and eluding? Does that not rise to the level of that, just driving a short distance away?
You know, I think that, when you talk about a misdemeanor offense that's been passed, it serves no purpose at this point to go back in time and pursue any criminal charges as it relates to that. A decision was made that night not to do it. We say it was not a good decision. And again, we support the officer's actions. As I indicated earlier, I had a chance to personally meet with the 2 officers who initiated the contact, just to express to them that I support their actions, I support them doing police work, and that this department will not show favoritism because of someone's status.
So Chief, tonight, let's say another high-profile city official almost flips a cruiser. You look inside, there's 3 joints in the console, 1 smoke, an open glass of alcohol in there. Would he be given a sobriety test tonight?
I would expect going forward that our officers will take appropriate action. And given that not necessarily all situations are the same, we recognize that when you talk about a misdemeanor arrest, certainly the officer's actions can be they're discretionary. However, when someone's under the influence, it certainly poses a danger to the public. And that's something that we're most concerned about. But given our posture today, no one gets a free pass.
So how long was this traffic stop last?
I don't have the exact time. It was lengthy. The delay certainly was caused by the arrival of the supervisor. Again, one of the officers suggested that it was almost an hour. I'm not certain if it took an hour for the supervisor to get there, but there was a delay on his arrival. And as I indicated before, upon his arrival, 4 of the officers were released from the scene without the supervisor having a conversation to get a full idea of what had occurred prior to his arrival. Because again, the sergeant, in his statement, now that, as I recall, indicated he could not smell an odor of marijuana, but time had lapsed, and so, but the officers had direct contact with the council person and his companion.
As far as the sobriety test go, there's obviously a number of things that are done when someone is suspected of being under the influence, in addition to the field's breathalyzer. It's not the one you do when you get them back to the department, but were any of those done? Were the questions asked? Was he asked to complete any of that stuff by anyone on this?
What we know now that nothing was done. Certainly, in my judgment or my opinion, based on the smell of marijuana emanating from the vehicle, the fact that there was a marijuana cigarette that had been smoked, unknown who, although the passenger did take responsibility for the cigarette, and on law you can't, even if you have medical marijuana patient, you can't have the marijuana on the inside of the vehicle. Or your person has to be secured in the trunk. So that's an issue as well. But when you look at the behavior, uncooperative, an attempt to move forward when the officers approached, the fact that there was a strong odor of alcohol emanating from the vehicle, possibly his person, those things would necessitate an additional investigation, which would require a field sobriety test.
You know, Cushingberry has, from the very beginning, when this first happened, this is their occupiers and all sorts of things about race. When you look at the fact that you've uncovered from your interviews and such, and listen to think about what he had to say in reaction, what goes through your mind? The fact that he tried to blame this on your office?
Well, certainly the facts say it best. This was not a driving while black. This was not a stop or evidence of biased policing. It was police officers doing police work. The fact that there was an early indication that the officers that stopped councilmen were both white is inaccurate. Certainly, the councilman was issued a citation. There were a number of violations present at the time of that stop, which would have necessitated some action. And so there's no evidence of biased policing in this instance. And I think I'll go back to what I said earlier. What would Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith say if they were confronted and stopped by police officers and had no proof of insurance, expired registration, no evidence of a driver's license, open alcohol, and marijuana in their vehicle? What would their expectation be? So part of our message is that there will be equitable treatment regardless of status. And we owe that not only to our officers who are out serving this city, but certainly to the community that we're serving.
So could you just break it down? How many things went wrong with the supervisor? Not doing the sobriety test? What else?
Well, just the overall. When you look at the overall, we would expect that when an officer notifies supervision to come out, the officers are looking for support, and certainly because this was an elected official, the officers knew that notifications needed to be made up the chain of command. Certainly, the sergeant failed to do that. We know that there was a ranking officer working that evening, a lieutenant, who was not notified. The captain of the precinct was never notified, and so there was no notification. And that's part of our general orders, that you shall make upward notification.
So this is the officers who notified
The officers fulfilled their responsibility. They notified their supervisor, and the supervisor made a decision. And that's where it ended.
I mean, the fact that the top officials found out did they find out from the officers who did that?
Yeah, we didn't find out from the supervisor, certainly.
Right.
Certainly, the officers reported it through another source, actually in the assistant chief's office. And that's how we learned of it.
This might sound a little bit like a silly question, but how did the officer determine that that cup was actually alcohol? You know, there's clear liquid. How would you go about that? I'm sure there's a procedure.
Well, again, officers' training experience, the fact that it was an empty bottle, which was, certainly the councilman acknowledged it was an empty bottle, but as the officer leaned into the car, could smell the strong odor of marijuana, he could certainly smell the odor of an intoxicant. Could it have been on the person? Possibly. And then you see a half-filled cup. Again, there was no analysis done on that liquid to make a conclusion that it was, in fact, alcohol. But it's an assumption. And again, they could smell the intoxicant emanating from the vehicle as well as the person, although the councilman did acknowledge that he had one drink at dinner.
Where was the last question here, folks? Last question. Sorry.
I'm not certain. Do we know exactly where the cup, was it in the center console with the smoke?
Passenger side floor.
The cup?
Right.
It was inside the vehicle.
Baby death investigation from yesterday.
Yes, in fact, I'll have the chief provide that.